Bet you can't hit 3,800.
Ping! The metallic ring echoed across the valley from 3,800 meters away, causing every member of the Special Forces team to freeze. The woman who had just made the impossible shot gently placed the rifle down, her left hand trembling slightly, not from nerves, but from old shrapnel still pressing against nerve endings from a war she wasn't allowed to mention. "How the hell?" Staff Sergeant Torin whispered, staring at the woman he'd dismissively called the gun cleaner just 20 minutes earlier. Fort Bragg's weapons maintenance bay existed in a different universe from the controlled chaos outside. While boots thundered on gravel and radios crackled with urgent voices across the base, inside the armory, it was quiet enough to hear metal whisper against metal. The air hung thick with gun oil and solvent, creating an atmosphere that most soldiers found oppressive, but Mira Thorne found peaceful. At 29, Mira had worked as a civilian contractor in the armory for 3 years, arriving each morning at 5 a.m. sharp, leaving each evening at 6 p.m. without fail. She moved through the weapons like a ghost, dismantling and reassembling with movements so precise they seemed choreographed. Yet, despite her skill, most soldiers barely registered her presence. She was furniture, background noise, just another civilian earning a paycheck, maintaining the tools of war. This particular Tuesday started like any other until the Special Forces team rolled in fresh from deployment. Their vehicles kicked up dust clouds that hadn't settled from the previous convoy, and they moved with the controlled aggression of predators returning to their den. Among them, Staff Sergeant Torin stood out not for his size but for his presence, the kind of man who expected the world to rearrange itself around his needs. Before diving deeper into Mira's story, I want to ask you something. If you had to hide your true abilities every single day, how would that weight feel on your shoulders? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if stories like this one touch your heart, please consider hitting the thanks button beneath this video. Your support helps me continue sharing these tales of unsung heroes who deserve to be heard. Thank you so much for being here. Now, let's return to that quiet Tuesday morning that changed everything. Mira was cataloging ammunition when Torin's team entered, their boots creating a percussion symphony against the concrete floor. She didn't look up, keeping her focus on the numbers in her ledger, each entry precise and methodical. The team spread out across the armory, unloading gear with practiced efficiency, their banter filling the usually silent space. "Need a complete breakdown on this beauty," Torin announced, setting a Pelican case on the counter with deliberate force. Inside lay a Chaytak M200 intervention, scarred from use but meticulously maintained. The rifle was a legend among long-range weapons, capable of delivering devastating accuracy at distances that made other rifles worthless. Mira glanced at the weapon, then at Torin, before pulling it toward her with gloved hands. She noted how he watched her, expecting hesitation or perhaps admiration for the sophisticated weapon. Instead, she simply began her work, fingers finding each component with unconscious familiarity. The upper receiver separated first, then the bolt assembly, each piece removed with economy of motion that spoke of countless repetitions. "You handle that like you've done it before," Torin observed, leaning against the counter. His tone carried a mixture of surprise and suspicion. "It's my job," Mira replied without looking up. She examined the bolt face with a jeweler's loupe, checking for wear patterns that might affect accuracy. The magnified view revealed microscopic fouling that most people would miss, but her hands were already reaching for the appropriate cleaning solution. "Most civilians freeze up around a rifle like that," Torin continued, watching her work. "Chaytak isn't exactly standard issue." Mira's hands paused for a fraction of a second before resuming their task. "I read the manuals," she said simply. It wasn't a lie. She had read every technical manual in the Armory's library, some multiple times. What she didn't mention was that she'd first encountered the CHATAC's specifications in a very different context, in a place where such knowledge meant survival rather than employment. As she worked, her fingers traced the rifle's contours with an intimacy that transcended mere familiarity. She knew this weapon's effective range, its ballistic coefficients at various altitudes, the precise adjustments needed for different ammunition types. The knowledge sat in her mind like muscle memory, demanding use even as she forced herself to appear merely competent rather than exceptional. "Tell you what," Torrin said suddenly, his voice carrying the edge of challenge that alpha personalities couldn't resist. "You seem to know your way around that rifle. Ever actually fired one?" "No," Mira lied smoothly, adjusting the scope mount with precise quarter turns. "I just maintain them." "Shame," Torrin drawled, exchanging glances with his team members who had drifted closer to watch the interaction. "Weapon like that deserves to be used by someone who appreciates it." Private Reeves, younger than the others with eager eyes that hadn't yet learned to mask emotion, piped up. "Sarge could hit a dime at 2,000 meters with that thing. Watched him do it in Afghanistan." "It was 2,000's child's play," another team member scoffed. "Real test is anything over 3,000. That's where the Earth's rotation starts playing games with your shot." Mira's hands stilled momentarily. She knew exactly what happened at extreme ranges, how the Coriolis effect pulled bullets off course, how air density changes created invisible barriers, how even the shooter's heartbeat could throw off a shot by meters at such distances. She'd calculated those variables so many times they appeared in her dreams, numbers dancing behind her eyelids like ghosts of missions past. "What's the furthest anyone's hit with one of these?" Reeves asked, his enthusiasm evident. "Official records around 3,300 meters, Torrin replied, his eyes never leaving Mira's hands as she reassembled the rifle. "But tomorrow, we're setting up at range 37. Got authorization to push out to 3,800 meters. Gonna see if the stories about this rifle are true." 3,800 meters. The number hit Mira like a physical blow, though she kept her expression neutral. That distance lived in her memory attached to screaming wind and the taste of dust, to calculations made under pressure while lives hung in the balance. Her left hand trembled slightly, not enough for most to notice, but Torrin's trained eyes caught it. "Something wrong?" he asked, his tone sharpening. "No," Mira replied, focusing on torquing the scope mount bolts to precisely 18 inch-pounds. She reached for a specialized ballistic analysis device from the cabinet. Laser scanning technology that Fort Bragg had recently equipped their professional maintenance shops with to ensure absolute precision. The blue light swept across the rifle barrel, displaying trajectory data accurate to micrometers on the small screen. "Fancy equipment," Torrin commented, watching the numbers scroll past. "Didn't have toys like that downrange." "So technology advances," Mira said neutrally, though she remembered when such devices were classified, available only to certain units conducting certain types of missions. Now they sat in armory cabinets, routine tools for routine maintenance. As she made final adjustments to the rifle, something fell from her pocket. A worn medical corps bracelet, the kind combat medics wore to identify blood types in emergency situations. She moved quickly to retrieve it, but Torrin's boot came down gently on the fabric, holding it in place. "That's interesting jewelry for a gun cleaner," he said softly, his voice carrying new interest. Mira met his eyes directly for the first time. "It was my father's," she lied. "He served in Desert Storm." She pulled the bracelet free and shoved it deep into her pocket, feeling the worn fabric against her fingers. The truth was far more complicated. The bracelet belonged to someone who'd bled out in her arms 5 years ago. Someone whose blood type she'd memorized along with every other detail of that fatal mission. "Your father teach you about rifles?" Torin pressed, sensing there was more to the story. "Among other things," Mira replied, returning her attention to the weapon. She ran through final checks with mechanical precision, each movement designed to appear competent but unremarkable. The rifle was perfect now, cleaned and calibrated to deliver death at distances most people couldn't even see. "You know," Torin said slowly, an idea forming behind his calculating eyes, "we could use an extra pair of eyes at the range tomorrow. Someone to help spot. Maybe learn something about long-range shooting. Interested?" The offer hung in the air like a challenge. Mira's rational mind screamed at her to decline, to maintain her cover as an unremarkable civilian contractor. But something deeper stirred, the part of her that missed the weight of a rifle, the satisfaction of variables aligning into a perfect shot, the absolute focus that made everything else fade away. "I have to check with my supervisor," she said finally. "Already cleared it with Captain Hayes," Torin replied with a predatory smile. "She's very interested in our training methods. Said she'd approve any personnel we requested." Mira's blood chilled. Captain Hayes. The name was common enough, but the way Torin said it suggested specific meaning. Her mind raced through possibilities, cross-referencing faces and names from her past. There had been a Lieutenant Hayes in Syria, Intelligence Corps, one of the few who'd questioned the official report about her last mission. "Oh, 700 hours sharp," Torin continued, sliding the rifle case closed with finality. "Range 37. Don't be late." As the Special Forces team filed out, Mira stood alone in the suddenly quiet armory. Her hands had stopped shaking, but her mind raced with implications. 3 years of carefully maintained anonymity might unravel tomorrow morning. The smart play was to call in sick, to disappear before questions became investigations. But as she looked at her reflection in the polished steel of a rifle receiver, Mira saw something she'd tried to bury. The ghost of who she'd been flickered behind her eyes. Call sign Phantom 6. The woman who could thread bullets through impossible angles, who'd saved lives with precision shots that defied physics. That woman had died in Syria, buried under accusations and classified reports. Tomorrow, she might have to resurrect her. The rest of her shift passed in a blur of routine maintenance and racing thoughts. As 6 p.m. approached, Mira found herself in the armory's back office, a cramped space filled with technical manuals and inventory reports. She pulled out a worn notebook from her personal locker, its pages filled with numbers that looked random to casual observers, but told a very specific story to her. Each entry was a shot remembered: distance, wind speed, elevation, result. 5 years of shooting reduced to data points. A way to hold on to skills that officially she'd never possessed. Her finger traced down to an entry marked only with coordinates and a single word: failed. That shot haunted her more than any success. 3,700 meters through a sandstorm, trying to cover her team's extraction. She'd made the calculations perfectly, accounted for every variable, squeezed the trigger with textbook technique. The bullet had flown true, taking down the enemy sniper threatening her unit. But the extraction had still gone wrong. The helicopter taking fire from a position she hadn't seen, couldn't have seen from her vantage point. Eagle 7 had died in that helicopter, held in her arms as she applied pressure to wounds that wouldn't stop bleeding. His blood had mixed with hers from her own injuries, creating a bond that transcended the physical. The medical bracelet in her pocket had been his. worn now as a reminder of failure disguised as success. Mira closed the notebook and locked it away. Tomorrow she would stand on a range with men who thought they understood long-range shooting. They knew the technical aspects, the mathematics of death delivered at distance. But they didn't know the weight of it, the way a perfect shot could still result in perfect failure. As she left Fort Bragg that evening, Mira stopped at a small VA clinic housed in a converted strip mall. The automatic doors wheezed open, revealing a waiting room filled with broken warriors pretending to read outdated magazines. She navigated to the memory care unit, where her father sat in his usual chair by the window. "Hey, Dad," she said softly, pulling up a chair beside him. Former Master Sergeant Robert Thorne didn't acknowledge her presence, his eyes fixed on something beyond the glass that only he could see. The IED that had taken his memories had left his body largely intact, a cruel joke that made his condition harder to explain to those who expected visible wounds. "I might do something stupid tomorrow," Mira continued, speaking to fill the silence rather than expecting a response. "There's a shot I need to take. Not for them, not for me, but I don't know. Maybe to prove I still can." Her father's hand moved slightly, fingers tapping against his chair arm in a pattern she recognized, the rhythm of rounds leaving a rifle, muscle memory surviving where consciousness had failed. She covered his hand with hers, feeling the tremors that matched her own damaged nerves. "I know what you'd say," she whispered, "that the hardest shots aren't the ones you take, but the ones you choose not to. But sometimes you need to remember who you were, even if you can't be that person anymore." The drive home took her through Fayetteville's military sprawl, past pawn shops advertising quick cash for combat gear and bars that promised to help soldiers forget. Her apartment sat above a Korean restaurant, the smell of kimchi and grilled meat a constant presence that had become oddly comforting. The space was Spartan, furnished with thrift store finds and little personality. This was a way station, not a home. But in her bedroom closet, locked in a case that hadn't been opened in months, lay the one piece of her past she couldn't abandon. The custom rifle wasn't military issue. She'd built it herself over years, each component selected for specific characteristics, the whole greater than its parts. It was chambered for the same 408 Ch-Tac rounds that Torin's rifle used, capable of reaching out beyond 4,000 meters in the right hands. Mira didn't open the case, didn't need to. She knew every curve and angle of that rifle, could assemble it blindfolded in under 2 minutes. Tomorrow, she would leave it locked away and safe. Tomorrow, she would play the role of curious civilian, would miss shots and ask obvious questions. Tomorrow, she would continue the lie that kept her safe. But as she lay in bed, numbers dancing behind her closed eyes, Mira knew the truth. Tomorrow, someone would place a rifle in her hands and dare her to take an impossible shot. And despite every rational argument against it, despite the careful life she'd built on anonymity and lies, she would take that shot. Because some part of her, the part that calculated wind drift while she slept, that saw the world in terms of angles and trajectories, was already on that range, already settling behind the scope, already breathing in the rhythm that preceded perfect stillness. The ghost of Phantom 6 stirred in her chest, demanding resurrection. And Mira Thorne, civilian contractor and nobody special, didn't have the strength to keep her buried any longer. Dawn broke over Fort Bragg with reluctant light, fog clinging to the valleys like secrets refusing to be revealed. Mira arrived at Range 37 at 6:45 a.m. 15 minutes early, but still the second person there. Captain Rachel Hayes stood by the range tower, her silhouette familiar in a way that made Mira's stomach tighten. "Mira Thorne," Hayes said without turning around. "Or should I say, Phantom 6. The words hung in the morning air like a challenge. Mira forced herself to maintain steady breathing, to show nothing on her face. "I think you have me confused with someone else, Captain." Hayes turned then, and Mira found herself looking at a face she'd last seen through scope crosshairs 5 years ago. Not as a target, but as an intelligence officer coordinating extraction routes, while Mira provided overwatch. The years had added lines around Hayes's eyes, but the sharp intelligence remained unchanged. "I was Lieutenant Hayes in Syria," the captain said quietly. "2nd Intelligence Battalion. I wrote 17 reports questioning the official narrative of what happened to your unit. Everyone got buried." Before Mira could respond, the sound of approaching vehicles filled the air. 2 Humvees rolled up, disgorging Torren's team with their typical Special Forces swagger. They moved with casual confidence, setting up equipment and spotting scopes like this was just another training day. None of them noticed the tension crackling between the 2 women. "We'll talk later," Hayes murmured, stepping back as Torren approached. "Ladies?" Torren greeted them with a grin that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Beautiful morning for some long-range work. Hope you brought your A-game, Thorne." Mira shrugged, playing her role. "Just here to observe and maybe learn something." "Sure you are," Torren replied, his tone suggesting he wasn't buying the act. "Well, let's see what my boys can do first. Reeves, you're up." The young private moved to the firing position with eager enthusiasm, settling behind a Barrett M107A1 50 caliber rifle. The weapon was a beast, capable of delivering devastating power at extreme range, but also notoriously difficult to master. Reeves took his time, checking wind flags and consulting the range card taped to his stock. "Target's at 3,800 meters, Torren announced. "That's 2.36 miles for those keeping score. Winds running 7 knots from the west. Humidity's up. Not ideal conditions." Mira watched Reeves's preparation with professional interest disguised as casual curiosity. His fundamentals were solid: good prone position, consistent cheek weld, proper trigger finger placement. But she could see the tension in his shoulders, the way he was fighting the rifle instead of working with it. The first shot cracked across the range, echo rolling through the valleys. Through the spotting scope, Torren called it, "Miss, low and left, about 3 meters." Reeves adjusted and fired again. Another miss, this time high. By his 5th shot, frustration was evident in every movement. The rifle that had served him well at moderate ranges was betraying him at extreme distance. "Take a break," Torren ordered, then looked at his other team members. "Anyone else want to try?" Several did, each taking their turn behind various rifles. Some came close, impacts visible through the spotting scopes, but never quite centered. The morning wore on, the fog burning off to reveal a day that promised heat and challenge in equal measure. Finally, Torren turned to Mira. "Your turn, civilian. Let's see if watching taught you anything." Mira stepped forward, aware of every eye tracking her movement. She'd maintained her cover for 3 years through careful mediocrity, never standing out, never showing the skills that lived in her muscle memory. But something about this morning, Hayes's presence, the weight of unfinished business, the familiar smell of cordite and gun oil, made pretense feel like cowardice. She settled behind the Chaytak M200 she'd cleaned yesterday, the rifle feeling like a homecoming. Her hands moved through preparation routines that predated her civilian life, checking action, adjusting scope position, reading wind indicators with unconscious skill. When she noticed Torren watching intently, she deliberately fumbled with the bipod adjustment. "Need help?" Reeves offered kindly. "I've got it," Mira replied, finally getting the bipod positioned. She pulled the rifle into her shoulder, finding that perfect pocket where stock met body. Through the scope, the target shimmered in morning mirage, a steel plate that looked impossibly small at this distance. "Remember to breathe," Torin advised, his tone condescending. "At this range, even your heartbeat affects the shot." Mira bit back the response that wanted to emerge, that she'd learned to shoot between heartbeats before Torin had graduated basic training. Instead, she began her breathing cycle, applying the nerve rehabilitation techniques from the advanced therapy program she'd been using to manage her hand tremors. The medical system developed for combat nerve damage had taught her to work with her injury rather than against it, timing her shots between the rhythmic trembles. Through the scope, she found the sweet spot where mirage stopped dancing and the target appeared solid. Wind flags showed consistent flow from the west, but she could see the subtle variations in grass movement that indicated a crosswind at the halfway point. Her mind calculated automatically: elevation adjustment for distance, windage for the primary flow, Kentucky windage for the crosswind pocket. "Whenever you're ready," Torin said, impatience creeping into his voice. Mira's world narrowed to the view through the scope. She found her natural respiratory pause, that moment between exhale and inhale where the body achieved perfect stillness. Her damaged nerves created a predictable tremor pattern: 3 seconds of stability, 1 second of movement. She'd learned to shoot in those windows of calm, turning disability into clockwork precision. The trigger broke clean at 4.5 pounds, the rifle pushing back into her shoulder with familiar violence. Through the scope, she watched the bullet's trace, a faint distortion in the air that told its own story. Time stretched as 2,800 grains of precisely machined copper and lead flew across valleys and through wind shears. Then, impact. Dead center. The range fell silent except for wind rustling through grass. Torin lowered his spotting scope slowly, face unreadable. Reeves whispered something that might have been a prayer or a curse. Hayes stepped forward, a small smile playing at her lips. "Lucky shot," Torin said finally. "No way a civilian makes that hit on the first try." "You're right," Mira replied quietly. "A civilian probably couldn't." She worked the bolt, chambering another round with movements so smooth they seemed choreographed. This time, she didn't pretend to fumble, didn't hide the expertise that flowed through her actions. The second shot followed the first, same hold, same trigger break, same perfect arc through morning air. Second impact, touching the first hole. "Jesus Christ," someone muttered. Mira fired 3 more rounds in steady succession, each finding the target with mechanical precision. 5 shots at 3,800 meters. A group that could be covered with a playing card. She safed the rifle and sat back, finally meeting Torin's stunned gaze. "Who the hell are you?" he demanded. "Someone who used to matter," Mira replied. "Now I'm just someone who cleans your rifles." Hayes stepped forward then, holding a tablet displaying classified files. "Gentlemen, meet former CIA Special Activities Division operator Mira Thorne, call sign Phantom 6, credited with 47 confirmed kills across 6 countries, including the longest confirmed shot by a female operator in agency history." The Special Forces team exchanged glances, recognition dawning. The CIA's paramilitary operators were legends in the special operations community, ghosts who appeared in war zones without official acknowledgement, conducting missions that never appeared in history books. "I heard about Phantom 6, Reeves said quietly. "They said she died in Syria. Whole unit got wiped out." "The unit died," Mira confirmed, her voice steady despite the pain the words carried. "Eagle 7, Hawk 3, Diamond 4, Spectre 1, all killed in action. I was the only survivor." "The report said you abandoned your position," Hayes interjected, her voice carrying years of frustrated investigation. "Said you broke Overwatch to save yourself while your team died." Mira's laugh was bitter. "Is that what they wrote? Creative fiction was always the agency's strength." She looked at each man in turn, seeing judgment waiting to form. "I held Overwatch for 6 hours while my team extracted the hostages. When the helicopter took fire, I displaced from my position to provide emergency medical aid. Eagle 7, Operative Thomas Rask, was bleeding out from shrapnel wounds. I chose to try saving him instead of maintaining cover on the extraction route." Her left hand trembled visibly now, the nerve damage asserting itself through stress. "Syrian forces hit my position with RPGs while I was applying tourniquets. Shrapnel tore through my left arm, damaged the radial nerve beyond repair. Tom died in my arms 12 minutes later. His blood mixed with mine. By then, the helicopter was down and burning." "But the hostages?" Torin asked, professional interest overriding personal dynamics. "3 of 4 survived," Mira said. "I carried them 17 miles to the secondary extraction point, moving at night, avoiding Syrian patrols. Took 11 days to reach friendly forces. By then, the agency had already written their report. Operator failure, position abandoned, recommendation for posthumous dishonor." Hayes pulled up another file. "Except someone filmed the whole thing. Syrian forces, ironically enough. They uploaded helmet cam footage of the attack, thinking it showed their victory. Instead, it showed Operative Thorn maintaining position under impossible conditions, only moving when medical intervention was required. The video played on the tablet screen, grainy footage showing a figure in tactical gear racing between positions, engaging targets while dragging wounded teammates to cover. The Syrian soldiers could be heard shouting coordinates, calling in the RPG strikes that would eventually overrun the position. "This footage surfaced 6 months ago," Hayes continued. "Prompted a review of the original investigation. Turns out, someone in the agency wanted your unit buried to cover up an intelligence failure. The mission was compromised from the start. Bad intel from a turned asset." Mira watched the footage with detached professionalism, seeing her younger self making decisions that had haunted her for 5 years. On screen, she could be seen applying pressure to wounds while returning fire one-handed, her left arm already hanging useless from nerve damage. "So they cleared your record?" Torin asked. "Posthumously," Hayes answered. "As far as official records go, Phantom 6 died in Syria. The agency preferred it that way, easier than admitting they destroyed one of their best operators with a false report." "I didn't want the record cleared," Mira said quietly. "Dead women don't have to carry security clearances or maintain cover stories. Dead women can work in armories and visit their fathers without handler oversight. Dead women can finally sleep without calculating firing solutions in their dreams." She stood, brushing dirt from her knees. "You wanted to know who I am? I'm nobody. Just another contractor maintaining your weapons. Someone who understands that rifles deserve respect because lives depend on them working perfectly. The woman who made those shots died 5 years ago. Don't resurrect her." "The agency wants to bring you back," Hayes said. "Full reinstatement, back pay, choice of assignments. They know they screwed up." Mira's laugh was sharp. "They want their weapon back. Someone who can reach out past 4,000 meters and deliver policy decisions via bullet. But I'm not that person anymore." She held up her trembling left hand. "Even if I wanted to be, the nerve damage is permanent. I time my shots between tremors now, turning disability into rhythm. That's not what the agency needs." You just put 5 rounds in a group tighter than any of us could manage, Torin pointed out. Nerve damage or not, you're still lethal. At paper targets, Mira countered. Put a human in that scope and see if my hand stays steady. See if I can make the calculations when I know the wind will carry the sound of impact back to me, when I'll hear the result of my decision through miles of air. She shook her head. I've heard enough death carried on the wind. Hayes stepped closer, voice dropping. What about the others? Your unit members' families still think they died because of your failure. Don't you want that corrected? The question hit harder than any physical blow. Mira thought of the families she'd never contacted, the funerals she couldn't attend, the grief compounded by lies. Send them the video, she said finally. Tell them the truth, but leave me buried with the rest of it. And if we can't do that, Hayes pressed, if the agency insists on your return? Mira walked to the Chaytak, running her hands along its barrel one final time. Then remind them what happened the last time they tried to force a ghost to be solid. Phantoms have a way of disappearing when you need them most. She turned to walk away, then paused. Torin, your problem is trigger discipline. You're slapping instead of squeezing, probably learned it doing rapid engagement drills. At extreme range, that translates to meters of deviation. Reeves, you're fighting the rifle's weight. Let it settle naturally. Work with gravity instead of against it. Martinez, your breathing cycle is too long. You're running out of oxygen and creating muscle tension. The team stared as she delivered precise corrections to each shooter, identifying flaws she'd observed while pretending disinterest. Fix those issues, and you'll cut your groups in half, she concluded. Wait, Torin called out as she headed for the parking area. Why help us? Mira turned back one last time. Because you're soldiers trying to be better at your job. That's honorable. You're not asking people to be weapons. You're trying to be better at protecting those who need it. There's a difference. As she walked away, Hayes caught up with her. This isn't over, Mira. The agency won't just let you go. They already did, Mira replied. 5 years ago, they declared me dead. I'm just honoring their paperwork. 6 months later, Mira still cleaned rifles at Fort Bragg. But word had spread in the quiet way that information travels through military communities. Veterans with trembling hands sought her out, asking about shooting techniques that worked with disabilities rather than against them. She taught them in the early mornings, before the armory officially opened, sharing the rehabilitation techniques that had saved her own shooting. On this particular morning, Torin appeared in the doorway with 3 young snipers, fresh from basic scout sniper school. They need to learn what extreme range really means, he said simply. Not just the calculations, but the weight of it. Mira studied the young faces, seeing her own eagerness reflected there. The hardest part isn't making the shot, she told them. It's living with it afterward. Every bullet has a story. Every impact has consequences. If you're not prepared to carry those stories forever, find another specialty. One of the young soldiers, a woman who couldn't have been more than 22, raised her hand. Master Sergeant Torin says you made the longest confirmed shot by a female operator. How do you deal with that record? Mira smiled sadly. By remembering that the measurement that matters isn't distance. It's whether the shot saved lives or took them unnecessarily. I've made perfect shots that resulted in mission failure and missed shots that saved entire units. The record books don't capture that complexity. She moved to the workbench, picking up a rifle that needed cleaning. Your job isn't to be legendary. It's to be effective, precise, and ethical. Make every shot count, not for the record books, but for the people depending on your accuracy. As the soldiers absorbed this, Mira continued her work. hands steady despite the perpetual tremor. She'd found her peace, not in anonymity, but in purpose, teaching others to be better than she'd been, to avoid the mistakes that had cost her everything. The ghost of Phantom 6 would always exist in classified files and whispered stories, but Mira Thorne had found something more valuable than operational glory. The quiet satisfaction of service without spotlight, of expertise shared rather than hoarded, of rifles cleaned with the reverence they deserved. Some warriors were meant for history books. Others were meant to ensure those books told truthful stories. Mira had chosen her path, and every tremor in her damaged hand reminded her it was the right one.